This video is sponsored by Raycon. When you select a class in TF2, you'll notice that each class is separated into 3 categories, those being offense, defense, and support. A lot of people have criticized this categorization, and for good reason. A class like Pyro isn't really an offensive powerhouse without a specific unlock that he didn't even get until 10 years after the game released, and is much more at home on defense or even taking on a supportive role. Meanwhile, an engineer can be just as supportive as he can be defensive, and Demoman is one of the strongest offensive powerhouses in the game, being lumped into defense because of sticky traps, which he's not using because just chucking his balls in people's faces is way more effective anyway. However, something I don't hear said as often is the fact that I think this categorization system actually works much better for weapons than it does for the classes themselves. Let's use Soldier as an example. Direct hit and Market Gardener, those stand out from the crowd by doing more burst damage than their contemporaries. Those are offense weapons. The Black Box, that keeps you healthy but prevents you from being as mobile and powerful. That's a defense weapon. The Banners and the Whip, they help your team out at the cost of your own personal damage output, easy support weapons. See what I mean? It makes a lot more sense and feels more intuitive than saying something like Sniper is a support class because he's incapable of existing without the support of his teammates, which also applies to Engineer, a defense class. Unless area denial in the sniper's line of sight also counts as support, but even then there's still overlap with engineer there. And I think there's an exemplary trinity of weapons that demonstrates this phenomenon in one of the least expected places, and that's Heavy's melee kit. While a lot of Heavy's melee weapons fail to see regular use because of how impractical it is to punch someone in the most effective range of your giant-ass minigun, his 3 most popular melee picks are perfect examples of this system of categorization. The Killing Gloves of Boxing can selectively be extremely powerful win-more offensive weapons that encourage you to get in your enemies' faces and reap the rewards of risky plays. The Gloves of Running Urgently are spectacular support tools designed to get you to the front lines and away from danger as quickly as possible at the cost of some survivability. And maybe it shouldn't come as a surprise considering Heavy himself is listed as a defense class, but his defensive option for this slot is difficult to dispute as the absolute best and most powerful of his melee weapons, and arguably one of the strongest weapons in his entire arsenal, the Fists of Steel. This is among one of the most understatedly busted weapons in the game, and it's once again an example of an already strong heavy melee being made even stronger through a now long-standing bug. Actually, multiple bugs. Sorry KGB, you'll get your chance one day. So what's the deal with the Fists of Steel? Let's find out after a word from our sponsor. Hey there, Heavy. What are you doing over there?
Oh, hello! Heavy is listening to his favorite music, the Chocolat's Heavy Weapons Christmas album!
Bit late for Christmas music, but that's great, Heavy. But aren't you worried that while you're listening to your music with those regular old earbuds, you won't be able to listen for spies behind you?
Listen for
Introducing Raycon's Bone Conduction Headphones. If you're as tired of inserting things into your orifices as I am, then these are perfect for you, as these compact, stylish headphones use special skeletonized technology to transmit sound waves directly through vibrations in your very own skeleton head bones. Perfect for when you're on a jog and trying to keep aware of traffic, or when you're listening to music at home and trying to keep an ear out for the home invader that's right behind you. Now you can keep yourself protected from gaining even more orifices. We asked a local skeleton what he thought of the bone conduction headphones, and here's his glowing testimony. No bones about it. These headphones are both waterproof and dustproof, so run in the rain, run in the sand, wait for it to oil and cover yourself in rain. The possibilities are limitless. I recently went on a bus trip to Chicago because I didn't have a real ID to get on a plane, only for them to come out and say several months after my trip that, oh no, it's totally fine to get on a plane without a real ID, you just have to pay a fee at the airport. Well, I wish I'd known that before I spent twice as much money and 50 more hours on the most uncomfortable bus trip of my life, you useless rat. And along the way, Raycon was a lifesaver for me as I was able to listen to as much music and as many videos as I wanted during my trip, which really helped to ease the misery and boredom that is driving through the empty wasteland that is the vast majority of Texas. There's so much nothing out there, dude.
Dallas, Salad.
So don't delay, and don't be like poor dead Heavy over here. Soon he'll be nothing but bones. But you can get your Raycon Bone Conduction headphones right now for 15% off by using my link in the description. Thanks to Raycon for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into it. Well, if all you care about is blue to red text ratio, then the Fists of Steel probably look like absolute garbage, but actually bothering to read will tell you the full story, though I know that reading is going to be difficult for some of the younger members in the audience. While active, the Fists of Steel will block 40% of all incoming ranged damage, meaning any damage type in the game that is not listed as melee damage specifically. This gives a heavy holding his melee out an absolutely insane pool of 500 effective health. Tack on a chocolate bar, some overheal, and any other kind of resistance to that like a backup or vaccinator charge, and God help you taking one of these monsters down. As a drawback, you take 100% more damage from melee damage while the weapon is out, meaning Demo Knights in particular are going to look a lot more threatening while you hold these things out, as you're now in one-shot range of almost any critical melee attack outside of a Scout's, or these other ones. On top of this, the weapon holsters twice as slow as normal, and you get 40% less overheal and 40% less health from healers while the weapon is active. That sounds like a pretty substantial list of downsides. But here's the thing, only the first downside matters, and you can exploit the second downside out of existence hard enough to turn it into an upside. Let's talk bugs. So holster speeds in TF2 have pretty much always been bugged, ever since the switch speed stat on weapons was changed from being universal to only applying when one particular weapon is being swapped to or from. For context, back in the day, if you equipped a degreaser on Pyro, you just had a universally faster switching speed on all of your weapons. But now you have to switch to or from the degreaser itself in order to get the benefits out of it. However, now in the case of something like the Fists of Steel, it's very easy to bypass the slow holster penalty by simply switching weapons twice. So let's say you're holding out the Fists of Steel when you see a Demo Knight lock eyes with you and now he's frothing at the mouth ready to kill your ass. Well, just swap to your secondary, and in the middle of the swap animation, simply swap again to your primary, which will now have the normal weapon swap speed, and mow down that Demo Knight before he even gets the chance to reach you with his charge. Not only have you completely bypassed both the melee damage vulnerability and the holster speed downsides of the Fists of Steel, but you've actively used them to your advantage to bait the enemy into thinking you're more vulnerable than you actually are. Like, you know how every spy ever really wants you to run at them with your melee because it's way easier to trick stab you that way? That, but instead of a knife, it's a minigun in your face. I'm sure the Spymans will come up with a ridiculous name for this trick stab soon. Not to say that the melee downside will never matter, because sometimes you'll just get caught off guard and not have time to swap away even with this concession, or maybe you just get overwhelmed because some people are trying to melee you while others are shooting at you outside of your range, and you're kind of just in a no-win scenario where either way you're taking more damage than you would have expected from the position you're in. However, for one thing, the class that's going to most often try and melee you in the first place is a spy, who, if he's good at his job, will instantly kill you no matter what melee weapon you're using. And the fact is that the melee downside is effectively the only one that actually ends up mattering if you simply play around the existence of the other downsides. Not to mention, Spy has the lowest DPS of any melee user in the game, assuming he's not getting a backstab, with his knife dealing only 40 damage with no chance for random crits. So he'd still have to butter knife you 4 times to get a kill on you, while the Fists of Steel function perfectly fine as a melee weapon that also still gets random crits. You would hope that the melee vulnerability of the Fists of Steel would give you a lot more of an advantage against the heavy using them, but really, in the most ideal circumstances, it just puts you on an even playing field where you both dance around each other and wait for the other guy to inevitably get one shot by whoever gets a random crit first. It's preferable to normal heavy who needs to get hit by 2 random crits in a row to get 2-tapped by a melee weapon, but it's really not as one-sided as you might hope. And you may be thinking that the health penalty downsides matter a lot too, right? Well, to a certain extent they can, but you can also very easily completely bypass them. For one thing, assuming your medic isn't using the quick fix, if you eat a chocolate bar, then even if you don't exploit the bug with this weapon, the medic's overheal will bring you up to 440 as opposed to the 390 it would normally be restricted to. Remember, heavy can't be overhealed past 450, so this is a difference of 10 health in exchange for being boosted to an absolutely absurd 733 effective health. That's more than a wrangled sentry, and more than an ubered vaccinator medic against whatever damage type he's resisting. This on top of the fact that you are still being healed, even if it is at a 60% rate. But if you don't want to run the chocolate bar, since maybe you want to switch to your shotgun quickly rather than your minigun for targets who still require you to be a bit more mobile once you switch away from the Fist of Steel, then you can still totally avoid the overheal downside by just having the medic start to heal you before you pull the Fist of Steel out, and then pulling them out in the middle of him healing you, erasing the downside from existence. That is 2 downsides out of 4 that just straight up don't exist if you play your cards right and exploit bugs in the game. Now, you will still get lower health from healers, meaning you can't just soak up damage forever, but it'll still take a while. Anyone who's ever tried to kill a vaccinator medic with the one damage type your class is capable of using that he's decided you're just not allowed to hit him with will know exactly what I mean. Not to mention, even if you choose not to abuse this, the medic healing you will always be building his uber charge at the full rate because you're not reaching maximum overheal. It's the same thing that makes the quick fix charge its uber so fast, but on every medigun. Pair that with a Kritzkrieg on a pocketed heavy that can retreat with ridiculous health at the first sign of danger, and you'll have people in game chat calling you racial slurs that are usually reserved for demo mains. Okay, so the weapon is way stronger than it's supposed to be because apparently Valve can't help themselves but to add overheal related bugs to Heavy's melee weapons. But how strong is this effect of blocking 40% of ranged damage really? I mean, ultimately you are still just a Heavy reduced to using your melee. Is it really that big of a deal? Yes, it absolutely is. On his own, an incredibly tanky Heavy with just his fists out that he's rarely going to fight people with because they're melee weapons that put him into melee range really isn't that big of a threat. If he was stuck to using these fists and nothing else, then this would be a very gimmicky and pretty awful weapon. But there's a lot more to it that makes these fists so powerful, and let's talk about one of the biggest reasons why: snipers. The Fists of Steel block a monstrous amount of sniper rifle damage, preventing even fully charged headshots from killing you as long as you're at full health and the sniper isn't using the machina. Now, even though I'm a sniper main, I actually think this is a good thing against snipers in particular, because as a class, Heavy really doesn't have very many options to directly combat or defend himself against snipers outside of basic movement that everyone should be employing against a sniper. Scout can bonk, Soldier and Demo can blast jump, Pyro can spam flares and also blast jump, Engineer can teleport, Medic can uber, Spy can cloak, and Heavy can dance. But if he needs to cross a particularly shitty sightline that he can't avoid otherwise, then the Fists of Steel allow him to do so with a much higher degree of safety than any of his other options. This on top of the fact that Heavy holding his fist in front of his face and looking up can already make him much more difficult, if not flat out impossible, to headshot from certain angles, meaning a sniper against a smart Heavy using these may as well not even bother shooting for all the difference that chip damage will do. I know it's in the nature of the game that sniper is a counter to Heavy, but that shouldn't prevent Heavy from playing the game or getting to the front lines consistently. Unlocks should allow classes to play outside of their comfort zone within reason, and in this case, that comfort zone is having 2 high caliber bullets lodged in your cranium, so I think it's fine to let Heavy have a little bit of fun when there's a competent sniper in the server. However, the Fists of Steel have the same problem that a lot of other weapons that counter sniper have. It's that they counter fucking everything. Positioning is one of the most important parts of playing Heavy, and this weapon just makes it so much easier at basically no cost unless someone wants to run the risk of meleeing you down, especially if you're around your teammates. It's the exact same thing as trying to melee a vaccinator medic while he's around his pocket, and much like a medic, the Heavy is going to be the anchor of any given team, and people are going to be orbiting around him, making any approach extremely difficult unless your class is entirely built around dealing damage with your melee. And even then, in the best case scenario where you actually manage to get the Heavy, you're almost certainly just going to be trading. So it creates this really shitty dynamic of either rushing in like a dumbass with your melee to hopefully get the kill on him, waiting around for him to switch off the tank glove so you can fight the Heavy class and not the closest approximation you can get in the base game to an MVM giant, or just carving down the 600 health marble statue in front of you one pitiful instance of damage at a time. Because as long as that Heavy is alive, he can still do things like push the payload cart, cap the objectives, defend points, heal his teammates, soak up damage for them, all while being 2 quick swaps away from being the most powerful close-range threat in the game if you try to approach him. It's fucking stressful, man. God, the 600 health tank still being able to cap points really does remind me of the Vaccinator. The safety net provided by the Fists of Steel also allows you to reposition yourself much more easily and get into an advantageous position that other heavies just can't without dying in the process. A heavy that can shrug off an onslaught of suppressive fire and be ready for a fight around the next corner is obviously a lot more valuable than a heavy whose only option for retreating is getting to reenact Platoon. Oh geez, spoilers, I'm so sorry. Maybe they shouldn't have put this moment on the VHS box cover if they were worried about that though. From the perspective of the heavy, all of this is awesome because heavy is pretty vulnerable to getting focus fired, which is a part of why he so often needs a medic or any other constant source of healing in order to be the most effective. Without that all-important healing, heavy is vulnerable to basically everything, except like pyros, demonites, and bombing soldiers. So having a means of keeping your health pool high during downtime when you'd otherwise be soaking up damage, such as during the middle of positioning yourself or while retreating, is super beneficial for the heavy. And maybe it's not quite as satisfying as doing the same thing with the Gru, but clutching your way out of a bad situation with the Fists of Steel is very relieving. On the other end of the fist though, this can be incredibly frustrating. Even if your aim is perfect, and even if you decide to specialize in a high damage weapon, if he's got the health to tank it, there's nothing you could do as he just dips behind a corner and forces you to either overextend just to kill him, or let him live to ambush you with a Tomislav another day. Not to mention, every second you spend pumping lead into this guy is a second you're not spending shooting at his more immediately threatening teammates. But if you don't shoot at him, then he'll be a threat as soon as he switches off the fists, so you get to pick your poison in exactly how you die. I don't think it's nearly as frustrating as some other weapons that make the class using them ridiculously tanky at no real cost, but it's never exactly fun to feel like you're being punished for not playing Demo Knight, or fucking Trollger. There isn't just a distinction between weapons based on their earlier mentioned roles. There's a more specific dichotomy of a bunch of different weapons in the game where you can essentially choose to be far more mobile or far more tanky. The Persuader and the Katana, the Big Earner and the Kunai, and most relevantly, the Gru and the Fists of Steel. I personally find the mobility options of all of these weapons to be far more satisfying, as they're riskier to use, but a much better representation of skill expression, and it's undeniably impressive when you're able to survive for an extended period of time when all you have to fall back on is your own agility and quick thinking. It's also more satisfying on the other end because managing to hit a skillful shot on a mobile target feels a hell of a lot better than pumping damage into a bullet sponge. Meanwhile, being tanky is something that's literally impossible to fuck up. If you eat shitloads of damage, you are doing exactly what you're supposed to. The only thing that you can do is know how much punishment you're able to take before you finally die, but that's true of literally every class. All being ridiculously tanky does is make it so that you can take shitloads more punishment. I don't think I'd be as impressed with someone beating a tough Dark Souls boss with 20 Estus and maxed out health as I would be with someone doing the same thing totally naked with a tiny health bar. I always feel a lot more accomplished when I'm able to use the Gru and my own movement to juke out a sniper versus when I just tank a headshot with the Fists of Steel. The former is an expression of not only my own personal playstyle on a macro level, but also my own competence on a micro level. It's like, hell yeah, I did that. With the Fists of Steel, I eat a sniper's bullet, and the Fists did that. It's really just a preference thing, but it's why even though the Fists of Steel are insanely powerful, and I would easily say Heavy's best melee option, I still stick with the Gru the vast majority of the time, just because I think it's way more fun to use. It shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that I think the Fists of Steel are a bit on the broken side, but I think that fixes are relatively easy. I think bullet resistance can stay at 40%, primarily so that heavies still have a solid option against snipers. Explosive resistance can stay, but I think it should be lowered a bit, maybe the 20%. Not so little that there's no benefit to using it, but not so much that it can't be punched through with the right amount of effort either. And I think there should either be no fire resistance at all, or an active fire weakness. Hey, fire is super effective against steel. Besides, I really don't think heavy of all classes needs an excuse to trash on pyros even harder, even if it is really fun to hit an extinguisher combo on a Fist of Steel heavy. Though that would also make heavy even more vulnerable to scorch shot spam than he already is, so At the point where you're not resisting all range damage anymore, you could also probably stand to go a little easier on the drawbacks, assuming they're actually made to function properly. The version of the Fist of Steel on our rebalance server is primarily focused on fixing the existing bugs, making the holster penalty actually function, and making it so medics can't easily build Uber off of it or let the heavy tank quite so easily. So even just some bug fixes would do a lot to keep the weapon in check. As far as weapons that I would describe as being over-tuned, the Fists of Steel are probably some of the least egregious examples. I'd kill to see a version of TF2 where the Fists of Steel are the single most overpowered weapon in the game. Oh no, the heavy with resistances capped the point no matter how much we shot him. Yeah, well, at least it's not the fucking Vaccinator!
Because you can like upset people who are better than you by like knocking them off and shit.
Okay,
You don't have to be
do I
like
do
the
it?
best player in the world.
What?
Oh my
You just hit them once and then
I didn't even know what happened, I just
My
couldn't move,
POV
so I
of that.
punched.
I was literally about to
Right.
market guard in their medic, and
think
out of
I'm
nowhere, I
in.
land on your head and you
You're good?
fuck me.
I think I'm in.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize.